I'm Benjamin Hall, and I'm searching for heroes. Well, hi, everybody, and thank you so much for joining me on the podcast again today. So a few weeks ago, when I spoke with the ambassador of Ukraine to the United States, Oksana Markarova, we spoke about many aspects of the continued war in Ukraine, shining a light, I suppose, on the Ukrainians who have dedicated their lives to fighting for their freedom, for their culture, for their homes. And in that conversation, which if you missed it, I highly recommend you take a listen, because the ambassador was incredible. She was amazing. But we spoke about Victoria Amelina, an amazing woman who dedicated her time to documenting the lives of extraordinary women like herself who dropped everything to join in the fight against Russia. Tragically, while Victoria was in the middle of turning these chronicles into a book, a Russian missile hit the restaurant she was in, leaving her with injuries that would ultimately kill the 37-year-old wife and mother. As they grieved her death, Victoria's husband, Alex, and a group of her friends and colleagues knew they couldn't let the work that she had done go unfinished. They made a plan. They would leave the work she had finished untouched, but would round out the powerful story she was working on so that it could be shared with the world as it so rightfully deserved to be. Today, I'm speaking to one of those friends and colleagues that played a crucial role in making sure that Victoria's story was told. And that's Ukrainian journalist Tetyana Teren. Today, she not only tells me about what a dedicated, inspiring person Victoria was, but explains why it is so important that writers' stories are told, especially when they're like the ones featured in Looking at Women, Looking at War.
It's about culture, it's about literature, it's about war, and it's also about advocacy work of Ukrainians now abroad. And somehow I have this feeling that Victoria continues working for Ukraine thanks to this book, even after her death. So usually it's very emotional experience for me to speak about Victoria, to speak about this book. But on the other hand, I'm glad that we have this book now, and that we managed to finish what was Victoria's dream, Victoria's goal. If you speak about her huge desire to speak to the international audience about Ukraine, about Ukrainian audience, about the reasons of this genocidal war against Ukraine, and about Russia's crimes against Ukraine.
Yeah, it's I know that Victoria actually helped with Volodymyr Vakulenko's book. We'll talk about that in a minute, but she said in the introduction to that, as long as a writer is read, he's alive. And, the same is true for Victoria's book. She was killed by the Russians in an attack, and yet through her book, she is still alive. And what message do you think she would like people to be getting from the book, as they read it?
I should remind our audience that Victoria decided to become a war crimes researcher at the beginning of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine in 2022. Because before that, she was a writer, prose writer for adults and for children. She prepared 2 novels and 2 books for children. And then she was trying to understand where is this field of work, where she could be the most useful and helpful for her country. And then when she joined the Truth Hounds organization, which is working with documentation of war crimes since 2014, she understood that even during the big war, she can be a writer. Because, many Ukrainian writers decided not to continue their writing, not to continue being writers during the war. And Victoria decided to find another place, another genre, and maybe somehow even another language for writing about the war. And because of that, she decided to try nonfiction, because before that she didn't work with nonfiction writing. And also she decided to start writing in English because it was so important for her to speak with the international audience about the Ukrainian situation. And if you speak about her main goals when she decided to work with this book, first of all, she wanted to speak about Ukrainian women and about their voice, about their role during the war. But it was the same aim if you speak about her novels or poetry, for example. But in this case, she also wanted to explain the world that this war, Russia's war against Ukraine, started not in 2022, not in 2014, but it started some centuries ago, and Russia has been trying to erase or rewrite Ukrainian culture and identity for many centuries. And it was important for her to show these connections between different historical periods in Ukraine. And because of that, she writes in this book about so-called executed Renaissance or about Ukrainian artists' 60s. And she shows in very talented way, I think, these parallels and connections between different historical periods. But also, on the other hand, I think that the main Victoria's idea in this book that we can speak about peace after the war without justice. And justice, this is the main word, the main idea of this Victoria's work.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because, you talk about how Russia is trying to rewrite Ukrainian history. Well, we've seen it on the battlefields as well. 1,000 monuments, statues, museums. It is a key goal of the Russians to try and actively eliminate Ukrainian culture. So do you think that for Victoria, for yourself, for writers, that it is more important than ever to stand up and keep Ukrainian culture alive? Because it's not about losing territory, it's about losing your identity and your soul.
Yeah, I think you and your audience remember the first days of the full-scale war, Russia's war against Ukraine, when Putin started from his public speech and explained that there is no Ukrainian culture, there is no Ukrainian language, there is no like our own Ukrainian history. And because of that, it's easy to understand why Russia started this aggression against our people, against our country. And I think for Victoria, who took part in many advocacy trips abroad and who took part in many different, conferences, festivals, and other public events abroad, it was so important to explain again and again these real reasons of this war, which is just impossible to understand without a historical perspective. Because if you don't know about Ukrainian history, if you don't know about the Soviet period of our history, about the period of the Russian Empire here, you can think that, yeah, it's war because of territories, it's war because of some political or economical reasons. And it's not true. It's very important to understand where is the source of this hate, against Ukrainians, against Ukrainian culture. And if you speak about Ukrainian cultural community and about such people as Victoria, I should say that our generation in Ukrainian culture grew up with this knowledge about thousands of Ukrainian intellectuals which were killed or repressed by the Soviet Empire or Russian Empire during previous centuries. And when you work in Ukrainian cultural field with these memories, with this knowledge about previous generations which couldn't finish their works, couldn't work with all their creative ideas because they were just Ukrainians. They spoke Ukrainian language, they wrote their books in Ukrainian. Your work can become even bigger responsibility for you because you should work not only for your ideas, your creative potential, but you should work always thinking and remembering about these previous generations. And you can imagine our feelings now, because now we continue thinking about these generations in our past, but we also have now hundreds of Ukrainian intellectuals, Ukrainian artists, writers, journalists who have been killed by Russia since 2014 or since 2022. And sometimes as a cultural manager, you know, the person who works with different cultural initiatives, I feel something like unbearable because I know that I don't have enough life and energy to work with legacy of all these people we have lost because of this war, this aggression, and this genocide against my culture.
On looking at a bigger picture, what do you think? And it's not just the war since 2022, as you say, or 2014 is before that, but what do you think this sort of ongoing conflict, as well as the more recent conflict, what does that do to a culture? What does it do to the literacy of a country? What does it do to writers? Does it change how they write? Do they write in a way that has to focus more on the real aspects of who they are and who their country is, rather than perhaps lighter issues? Or can you have a variety of issues after that? What's it done to the culture and the future of the culture?
Oh, it's a huge and difficult question, and we can have like another conversation only about all these changes, current changes and possible future changes in our culture. What I see now, I see some important aspects. First of all, of course, we have enormous losses if you speak about cultural heritage, and I mean losses. Artists and writers, journalists, and other makers of Ukrainian culture who we have lost since 2014. And also we can speak about Ukrainian cultural heritage because it's approximately 1,000 of cultural objects which were ruined or damaged since 2022. And on the other hand, you may know about the cases like, for example, in Kherson or Mariupol's museums, where Russians just stole thousands of cultural artifacts. And it's something also very painful for our community because we don't know whether we will be able to return this heritage to our country. Yes, from Russian museums and Russian archives, because if you speak about previous centuries of our culture, Russian and Soviet regimes stolen thousands of different artifacts in our culture, and we didn't return all these works to our museums and archives. This is a very sad part of these changes, unbearable changes in our culture. But on the other hand, you know, we are witnessing now a huge interest in Ukrainian culture. If you speak about Ukrainian audience and especially about young generations of Ukrainians. And maybe you also witnessed these new bookstores, for example, in different Ukrainian cities, not only in Kyiv, but also, for example, in Kharkiv, which is very close to the front line now. So you can see these great, nice places where people want to gather to discuss new books in Ukraine, to discuss new movies and other cultural events. It's difficult to buy tickets to Ukrainian theaters now or to watch new Ukrainian movies. So people just want to know better their culture and who they are. Maybe it's understandable because of this huge risk to lose your culture, to lose your identity. But as a cultural manager, as a person who works with Ukrainian culture, of course, I'm very happy to see all these processes. I'm very happy to see these new generations who want to know more about their roots and about their culture. Though, of course, we pay enormous price for this interest in our identity and culture. And if you ask about some genres, you know, about some specific parts of this culture, which is created now by Ukrainian cultural makers, I can say that, of course, now we have a period of documentation in different forms. So this is, first of all, nonfiction in literature, diaries, reportage stories, collection of memoirs, of interviews, and the same in theater, the same in cinema. So this is a period of documentation of crimes and also documentation of our emotions. Because, of course, when the reality around us changes so quickly, so sometimes during 1 week, we have feeling that, okay, it was maybe 6 months during this week, if you speak about our emotions. And because of that, it's so important to work with documentations of all these feelings and our reality. And if I think about future, which is quite difficult now to think about our future and to predict anything in our future. Of course, I'm waiting for fiction genres in Ukrainian culture, because now all Ukrainian writers, film directors, and other people explain that it's just impossible to work with fiction, you know, in our life when we have such a reality around us. So I'm waiting for novels, I'm waiting for movies, theater plays, maybe in 10, 15 years, because of course we need a distance after all these challenges, after all these losses we have had in our life.
That's fascinating. I didn't know that there was a bookstore that's opened up in Kharkiv, and it's so interesting. You know, that's somewhere that is under attack from the Russians. And what does that say about culture? That even in the middle of it, people are still looking for culture. They're still looking for books. They still want to expand their mind. And in so many places, books are about often escaping your reality. It's about taking you to another world, but it's very different in Ukraine. I think you've just said that it's all about fact. It's about recording what's happened. It's about documenting it. So it's just fascinating to look at what it does to culture and how that changes. One of the things that Victoria does in her book is document these war crimes. And there's some tough parts to read when she does so. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the book, how it was actually put together, because Victoria was working on a book. And can you also perhaps tell us, and she was a friend of yours as well, we mustn't forget that. So can you tell us about how she was writing the book and how you then finished it and put it together?
Yeah, I remember that Victoria mentioned about this idea to work on such a book in June 2022. It was the first time when she sent me at the beginning like this first idea. And then she sent me the first reportage story she wrote for this book, because it was her first idea to prepare a collection of reportage stories about Ukrainian women who are documenting war crimes in Ukraine since 2014. So she found many brave, amazing Ukrainian women, human rights defenders, journalists, writers, some of them directors of museums who in different ways, you know, work with documentation of war crimes. But then, as a very talented writer, she started thinking about more difficult structure, more difficult style for this book. And if you already read it, you know that she added some parts from her diary, for example, some essays, some historical like parts of other books, even some reports from the field missions of truth hounds she had with them. So it had to be a complicated non-fiction story with different types of writing, different genres even, and even one poem at the end of this book. So as a person who works with literature and culture, I see very talented composition, very talented idea and scenario of this book. But unfortunately, because of the tragedy in Kramatorsk, when Russians attacked the restaurant in the center of the city near the front line, Victoria finished only 60% of this manuscript. And 5 days before the tragedy, she decided to send me this manuscript with her usual dark humor, because Victoria had an amazing sense of humor. And she wrote to me that I know that many Ukrainian writers, especially who decided to join the army, sent you their unfinished or unpublished manuscripts. So please save my manuscript as well, because I'm going to Kherson, maybe to other territories near the front line, and who knows what can happen in Ukraine during the war. So she decided to send me this manuscript, and it was the last manuscript we received in this case. And in 1 month after the funerals in Kyiv and Lviv, we spoke to Victoria's husband, Alex, and decided that we should start this editing of this book. And we involved 2 more people, Victoria's friends, Sasha Dovzhik and Yarina Grusha. And we were working on this book during 1 year after Victoria's death. And our main decision was not to change anything in this manuscript, because when you don't have the author of this book, you have no right to change anything in this manuscript. So our main task was to remember about the audience, to remember about future readers of this book. And because of that, we added a lot of footnotes for the audience. And also, thanks to Victoria's husband, we had access to Victoria's archive, and we could compare different parts, different chapters, because sometimes Victoria prepared like a more completed version of some chapters, and she didn't have a possibility to include this like more completed version to the last manuscript. So it was long, it was difficult, it was very emotional process, but I can say that I found one more family when I was working on this book with these amazing people. And I think that this process helped us to get through this difficult experience and feeling of loss.
More of our conversation right after this. I wonder, when you found out that Victoria had been killed, was there ever a sense, and not just Victoria, but so many of the other writers and journalists and translators who have been killed, but at any point, if you wanted to stop reporting? Has it ever made you say, I don't want to go, I don't want to continue this? Because people would understand that. Your initial response saying, I don't want to go back and keep this, it's dangerous to myself. Or did it do the opposite? And did it say, I'm never going to stop now, I have to keep working? I mean, that must have been, did you experience both of those?
Oh, Benjamin, it's such a difficult question, because when the tragedy in Kramatorsk happened, we just finished our work on Volodymyr Vakulenko's Diary of Occupation. You mentioned already this name, and I will remind the audience about another tragic case in Ukrainian modern culture and literature. Volodymyr Vakulenko was a Ukrainian writer for adults and for children, and he lived in a small village Kapitolivka, Kharkiv region. And he was murdered by Russians in March 2022. And Victoria was the first person who came to the Volodymyr's yard in this village after liberation of this part of Ukraine, of the Kharkiv region. And when she met his parents, he learned that just 1 day before Russians came to Volodymyr's yard, the writer decided to bury his diary of occupation in his garden under the cherry tree. So Victoria helped his father to dig out this manuscript. So you see so many symbolic connections in this story. So one more unfinished, unpublished manuscript in this story, and Victoria again in this story. So she brought this manuscript to Pan Ukraine and to the Kharkiv Literary Museum. And during the next year, it was 2023, we were working on editing and publication of this book. And it was also a difficult emotional process when we had to discuss all the time what is the best decision for this book, for this text. And when we finished it, we had the first presentation at the Kiev Arsenal Book Festival. So Victoria took part in this festival. And in 2 days, she was injured because of Russian attack in Kramatorsk. And maybe you know that Victoria died on July 1st, and this is Volodymyr Vakulenko's birthday. So there are many connections in this story, and to be honest, after this work with Volodymyr Vakulenko's diary and also my involvement into the preparation of his funeral in Kharkiv, to be honest, I already had this feeling that I need to have like a pause, I don't know, in my work, in my life, because it was unbearable, to be honest. And then the new huge tragedy happened in my life, in life of our community. And, you know, I understood in this case that this is only one possible way which can help me to deal with this tragedy and this feeling of loss. Maybe I can mention also at the end that there is a very powerful novel which wrote Olesya Khromaychuk, a great Ukrainian ambassador in London. She's a director of the Ukrainian Institute in London. And Olesya wrote her novel about she lost her brother also as a soldier before 2022. And she wrote about her experience, how she was dealing with this tragedy. And there is only one advice, you know, in this story: when you're dealing with such a huge pain in your life, you can continue working with legacy and memory and your love and your pain in some way. Olesya decided to write a novel about her brother, and we decided to continue our work with Victoria's book. And I should say that it was very helpful for me in this case. And as I mentioned, thanks to this book, thanks to Victoria, who is still present for me in my life and in my work, I found so many great people, all her friends, all her sisters, how she named them, like came to my life. And now I have a lot of connections with Victoria in my life, and I still have this feeling that she is with me.
It's amazing to think of how we talk all about culture, about how culture can also help you to recover. It can perhaps give you something to focus on. And, you know, again, you look at this book, looking at women, looking at war, and it's such a hard read, parts of it, but I can't help but also feel some amazing strength coming out of it. There's courage in it. And, you know, I found covering conflict, you know, for many times, the first things you see are the tragedy and the pain and the sorrow and the loss. But after that, you also see the bravery and the compassion and the kindness. And it's just, I think that this book does that as well. And I think that it must be such a clash for you to see both the worst and the best at the same time. Do you feel that? Do you feel that you see the two extremes? Maybe you don't feel like you see the middle anymore. You just feel the best and you feel the worst. And how difficult that must be.
You know, I have this feeling you described since 2013, when the Revolution of Dignity started in Ukraine. And since that exact moment, I always have this feeling of pain, because we lost our territories, we have occupied territories in Ukraine, we lost so many great people, and it's just unbearable to live with this understanding that we can't return these people to our life. But on the other hand, of course, I see this bravery, I see this love to our land and to our country every day. And even in this case, in case of this book, Of course, it was painful for all of us. When you finish reading this book, you can read about the funeral. Victoria describes her funeral. Maybe you remember this moment that she wrote, okay, and now when I collected all these stories, I have already all these women in my book. I can imagine that all these women, my sisters, can come one day for my funeral. Maybe they will find time for this for this event. It's also again about her dark humor. And I remember that when I read this part of the book, of course, it was something impossible just to go through, because I remember her funerals, very well. And I remember all of us, her sisters, at these events. But on the other hand, I was feeling not only pain. When I finished reading this book, I was so proud of my friend. I was so proud of her talent, of her bravery, of her dedication to this idea, to the idea of this book, dedication to her country, to her people. And all the time when we have presentations of this book, when we have conversations on this book, I have the same feeling. I have this feeling of pain, but on the other hand, I'm so proud of her. I'm so proud of her talent and of her work. And this is always this mix of feelings in Ukraine.
The book looks at women in war. And I wonder, most people think of war and they think of the soldiers and many of the men out there. Do you think that there is an importance to write about women? Why did Victoria really want to focus on women for this book?
I always hear this question, and it's difficult for me to explain without Victoria. There are a lot of questions which I can't answer without her. But I think that it was a focus of her work, not only if you speak about this concrete nonfiction book, because if you speak, for example, about her poetry, which she started writing also at the beginning of full-scale war, the majority of her heroines, these are also women in her poems. But on the other hand, of course, she was a human rights defender. She always spoke about rights of people, and especially about rights of women. And I think that in this context, it was important for her to show this stereotype, because usually when we speak about wars and conflicts, we're trying to look at these difficult events in our lives through men perspectives, because usually the majority of soldiers are men. But if you speak about Russia's war against Ukraine, if you speak about this current moment, it's very important for us to remember that there are so many brave women among our soldiers, among our volunteers, among war crimes researchers, or among journalists who are covering this war. So I think for Victoria, it was one of her aims to show the war through women perspective, which is unusual not only for Ukrainian literature, but also for the world literature and history.
I'm amazed you mentioned that you had been sent a number of reports or diaries written by soldiers. And I'm fascinated if you could just tell us a little bit about what those read like, what it's like to read someone's thoughts who are there in the trenches, who are going through the worst. What have you learned from those reports, and how, we look at the World War I, World War II poets in the UK and around the world. They have written some of the most incredible pieces of work ever written, I feel. Do you think that some of these soldiers are writing thoughts they'd never thought before and putting down images they hadn't thought before? And is this really depicting what life is like at the moment?
I think that since 2014, when the war started, this literature written by Ukrainian soldiers who used to be writers, or who used to be, I don't know, all other professionals in Ukraine, it's one of the most important parts of our literature, of course. And I mean, again, not only professional writers who decided to join the army, but also people who found inside themselves this necessity to speak about their experience in literary form. And I can mention, for example, Artem Chekh, who used to be a well-known Ukrainian writer, and who decided to join the Ukrainian army at the beginning of Russia's war against Ukraine. Firstly, it seems it was 2015 when he joined the army, and he wrote a very important book. In English, it's 0 Point. It seems it's translated into English. It was published in America. And, you know, for me, it was a very important documentation of these feelings, of these changes, because it's difficult for a writer to become a soldier. It's another field, it's another profession, it's another lifestyle. And this is a very honest book about these changes, about these emotions in a writer's life, I think. And now Artem joined the army for the second time. It was in 2022. And he writes a lot of essays and just op-eds about his feelings. You can read the last one. It was published, it seems, 2 days ago in the New York Times, for example. So all the time he was trying to explain what it is to be a soldier when you are just a writer or you are just a human being, and no one wants to be a soldier. But if you want to have your country, if you want to have your culture and to be Ukrainian writer, you have no choice. You should fight for this right to be Ukrainian writer and to write in Ukrainian. Because as we spoke already, this war against our culture and against our identity, and because of that, it's so important for writers to write about this experience, to explain this experience. And you know, usually when I'm abroad and take part in some advocacy campaigns in other countries, I can hear these questions: how we can support Ukrainian culture during war times. And my main answer, my main thought always, please translate Ukrainian literature. And in this case, please translate books written by Ukrainian soldiers, because it's another optics which you can find only in their texts. You know, I am a person who visits Ukrainian frontline territories quite often, because we have such a program of volunteering trips inside Pan-Ukraine for Ukrainian and foreign writers and journalists. But even having this experience, I can't imagine the real life and the real feelings of people who are on the front line, who are fighting like every day for our future. And thanks to these books and these movies, I can imagine and I can feel what is going on in Ukraine. So because of that, I think it's so important for other countries and other cultures to help us to spread this knowledge and these feelings through translations of our modern literature, but also of our classical literature, because it's another reason. In this case, we can show that Ukrainian culture was not created like 10, 30 years ago. It has a great history, and it's important for us to show that our culture and our history is a part of European history and culture.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a perfect place to leave it. And I think Looking at Women, Looking at War is a book that can do that. And, anyone can go out and buy that. And I think it's a small view into what it's like and the role that culture is playing inside Ukraine. Tetyana, I want to thank you again for joining me today and for the work you keep doing. I understand as well how important culture can be. And it's a battle that you have to fight alongside the soldiers. You've got to keep fighting for every part of Ukraine. So thank you again for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Benjamin, thank you so much for what you are doing for Ukraine and for our culture and our journalistic sphere here. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tetyana. We'll be back in a moment with Searching for Heroes. Well, I think that something that stood out for me right there, I think it's something amazing, is that Victoria Amelina worked on a book written by another writer who had died while he was writing it. And she got his book that was buried under a cherry tree, and she finished it and had it published. And then Victoria herself was killed while she was writing a book. And Tetyana, her friend, picked up that book, finished writing it, and published it. And I think what an incredible sign that there are people there waiting to help culture continue. And it's not just culture, it's every source, everything in that country. When it is defeated, people will pick it up and they will keep running to finish it. They won't stop. It's what community is about. It's what a country is about. Soldiers are the same. Someone next to them is brought down. They get up and they keep fighting. And I think that that happens in culture as it happens on the battlefield. And I really think that speaking to Tetyana today was actually quite amazing. What a remarkable woman. All those writers are. And sometimes it's forgotten that in conflict, culture and writing, journalism can be so important. And she talked also about why it's important. It's not just important because you have to sort of share what's going on. It's important to keep the culture alive, and it's important to document what's happening. And for the future, hopefully it's important to make sure people never forget. So again, I just think that the role of journalists in culture and writers is just absolutely essential. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining me today. And I hope you join us next week as well. Thanks for listening to Searching for Heroes. Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcasts Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.